My name is Theodore Cottingham with the School of God in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, USA. I'm coming to you this day as a common, ordinary man, one who has sought to know God for most of my life. I grew up as a Orthodox Christian. I've sat in probably thousands of church services, spent probably thousands of hours studying the Bible, reading about the Bible, praying the Bible, praying Bible verses. I was probably about 25 when, maybe a little older, when I feel like my prayer life began to really have life. This is the school of God. For you to come into the mind of God, to know God, and not just know about God. Not just have a theory of God that someone else has given you or that you've read about. This is the school of God for you to experience God for yourself. Hear me well. Listen, understand. Put these words I'm saying in neon lights, if you will. This is a school for you to know God. Not just know about God. Not just to read about God, what God has done in the past or what you think God is going to do in the future. This is a school where you come to learn to interact with God. Where God begins to listen to you in a new way. Maybe because you come to God in a different way. You approach God differently. No longer in fear. You begin to learn there's much more to the story about God and what we have been taught, so many of us on planet Earth. I suggest to you is quite convoluted and many things the very opposite of God's heart. The heart of God, the heart of light, the heart of love. For the God that I know, the God that I have come to interact with, the God that has taught me and given me so many messages that I have written with my own hand, just like a scribe. The God that I know is leading us out of knowing about God into knowing God, interacting with God, and learning the heart of God, and that the heart of love is to teach you directly. Not through another man, woman, or book. Not through some event that someone else said was done for you. But you beginning to experience the real you without fear of coming into God's presence being who you really are with no pretense, and letting God be who God is with no pretense. Revealing your hearts to each other. The heart of God is to heal the heart of God within you, for you were never without the heart of God. It may have been encrusted, rusted, unused, disused. But your link to God cannot be severed. And the God that I know, the God that I teach about, the God that I pray to, the God that I share with you now, does not condemn you, no matter what you've done in the past. There is forgiveness of you. And where you begin to receive forgiveness is by forgiving you. And in my path, not that it's right or perfect for every person, but sharing with you, my path, I began to forgive everybody about everything that I remembered about them, or anytime I remembered a hurt, something that hurt me, wounded me, people precious to me. I would respond in my mind, I forgive me and I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you and I forgive me. And I began to let forgiveness flow from me, to each other, without taint of motive, without fear of repression, and without want of reward. I just began the practice of being a forgiver. As I wanted to know God, and I wanted to know God in the power of the resurrection. And in one place, the Bible speaks of knowing God in the power of the resurrection and the fellowship of Jesus' sufferings. So I wanted to know what that was about. I decided I really believed the Bible verse. If you ask God for a fish, will God give you a stone? So there were basic precepts that guided me along this path. But this path has led me where I never imagined. When I began, I had no concept that God would teach me directly. This is far beyond thinking God says a word, says a phrase, or that there is a general leading to what God is leading me to do, or what I so often called in the past the will of God. I had no precedent for interacting with God where God would converse with me. Converse, interact. Are you willing to interact with God? Are you willing to come into the presence of God, like Esther did, and intercede for your people? Who are your people? Whoever choose to be my people, whoever choose to love, whoever chooses to heal each other, whoever chooses to no longer separate in their mind so that the mind of God will flow into them, and they will actually be creating the consciousness of God with them as one. Are you willing to give up your fear of God? Are you willing to give up your fear of hell? Are you willing to give up your want, your ego-driven want of heaven? Are you really willing to surrender to be who you really are? You see, all this is in the process that you may go through to some degree or a great degree. I'm not predicting what you will go through. I'm sharing with you my experience, what I've learned through God teaching me directly, and the path that I meandered, that I stumbled along for so long to learn what I know. I know what love is now, and love does not condemn. If your God condemns you with a judgment that you fear, wrath and vengeance coming upon you, well, you can choose your God. You can choose your interpretation of God. You can serve that God. You can try to finance the operations of people who espouse those theories. You can dedicate your life to those things. But that's not the God I know. That's not the God I pray to. That's not the God I've experienced. That's not the God who has taught me at our 2 a.m. meetings, or given me day after day multi-page documents that I wrote as a scribe. I will discuss this process more and more. I was looking back yesterday in one of the lessons, and right off the bat it said, teach people to pray. Teach people to pray. This is your first and foremost task. Teach my people to pray. Religion has so dominated the earth. We've been so inculcated with all sorts of rites, rituals, and practices. How to talk, how to think, how to reply, how to behave, to conform to the ways of those who have taught us. I'm asking you to let God teach you what God is, and to learn who God is for yourself. No longer assuming that your parents had it right. No longer assuming that you've had it right. I'm asking you to come into a new learning system that I address, that I say has a name. It's the operation of the new covenant. I'm defining the operation of the new covenant as a teaching process where God interacts with you, converses with you, with your vocabulary, with your diction and grammar, utilizing your experiences, your feelings, and your knowledge. You see, this is a new day, and this is the new beginning. So, when I wanted to know God directly, I realized I didn't just want to know the book about God. Because by then I'd come to the conclusion a lot of people know a whole lot about God, but I'm not sure they know God. I came to the conclusion for me, looking around, service after service, Sunday after Sunday. Finally, it just welled up within me. Is this all there is? Is this all there is? Is this what I'm supposed to do the rest of my life and die? And I hope that I've had enough faith that I have pleased some higher power? Is this all there is? And yet I would sit there in those pews and I would listen and wonder. And I began to take action in my life. I began to ask for more. Rather than just ponder, wonder, and sit there, waiting, trying to accomplish what I was being taught by other people, I decided I wanted to know myself. And I decided I would pay the price. And I began to tell God that. God, I want to know you. And I will pay the price. I had no idea what the price was. Knowing God is costly and worth it. If you really want to know God in the power of the resurrection, are you willing to learn where God hurts? How God feels pain? How God experiences your rejection? Are you willing? I decided I was willing. There was a level of desperation, intent. So in one sense, I learned to come to God without want, thinking about the verse, I shall not want. And yet I was focused. I wanted to know God. I was tired of the charade. I was tired of the repetition of preachers that wanted to preach about faith and prosperity and waiting on God and God this, God that, God the other. when I saw people flowing to church in and out over the years, desperate to know God, destitute, being given all these promises and their lives never changing. I wanted more. And I say these things maybe to help expand what you can see as your right privilege and your capacity to know God directly. So many people are told to wait on God, wait on God, wait for the rapture, wait on the move of God, wait on the anointing of God. My friend, I tell you, God is waiting on you. God is waiting for your heart to be in motion. See, God is not afraid of you making a mistake. Look at the story of Saul to Paul. There's a lot of misinterpretation about different stories in the Bible, what they mean, their accuracy, their authenticity. But so many people know those stories, and I studied so diligently for so long. I use those stories at times to share with you. So if you want to know God, my life says, it's up to you. You play a role that is non-trivial. You play a role where you can no longer sit on the sidelines and be a spectator, thinking Jesus has done everything for you, and you're just to wait, make money, and try to be comfortable till you die. You cannot be a spectator. And this, my friend, is not about the arena of faith. This is about the realm of the kingdom of God and you beginning to walk in it. Realizing it's not going to come to you and take you away to some perfect place where you live out whatever you think eternity is. The mind of God is in motion. The mind of God grows the mind of God. The tree of life plants its seeds in whoever will receive them. The word is the seed. The seed, the living word that bears the fruit of the living Christ. So many of these things I didn't know. I came to God just like probably millions do. But I knew there was more. So one of my first prayers in my path of desperation, I began to pray. And I offer to you a starting point, not the starting point, but I'm sharing with you my heart and my path. a starting point. I began to yearn for more. So I began to pray. God, correct me where I'm wrong. Correct me. I might say it 5 or 10 times in a row. I would think it at times driving down the road. I would pray it on my knees. God, correct me. I knew I could come as a child. And if I didn't come with a pompous attitude, somehow I knew in my heart love would meet me. I had no idea how love would talk with me. I had no concept how love would reach into my heart and begin to heal my wounds. Tell me things. Whisper into my ear, as it were, without syllables, and yet a knowing, an energy, a way of communicating that which God is, not gendered. God is not male. God is female. And yes, having made that statement, God is one. Man, woman, woman, man. Woman, man, God. God, man, woman. God is not beyond your thinking. God is not beyond your revelation. And you do not have to ask anyone else's permission to come into the presence of God. God is waiting on you, waiting on your heart to be open, waiting for you to see not your power. Don't look for your power first, but look to see love. Give love, become love, and learn to let love live in you, to learn to let love communicate with you. Love that goes beyond any love you have ever known on earth or in any emotional experience of the soul. I suggest you're really wonderful. No matter what your flesh looks like, no matter what you've done to each other or done to you, the real you is not only powerful and can learn to heal people, but I suggest, as I have been taught over these years with the first person words of God, you heal you first. You begin to heal love. You begin to learn what love is, allowing love to communicate, interact, teach you who you really are without limits. Without limits. So that when you begin to come to God and you seek a reply, you seek interactivity, God will begin to interact with you as an equal. not an underling, not something of God's creation, but God sitting down at the table with God with respect. With love. And love begins to flow and love communicates. Love knows there's no retribution. Not really. There's no vengeance. There's no wrath. And this God that I know is not subject to the molecular. There's no nuclear bomb, no gun, no bullet, no force on earth stronger than what God is. And God is love. Love that says, be me. Be me. God says that to you this day. Yes, this is what I'm asserting, no matter how ludicrous it sounds to you or how far-fetched. God says, be me, because when you really know who you are, you're not separate. Let this mind be in you that Christ had. Let the Christ mind not come into you so that you contain it being a separate container. You become one. So that the voice of God, as you begin to know God, is no longer external, coming into you. It is you. Because the kingdom of God is within you. And the Holy of Holies is between your ears. And God will conceive in you things you never imagined. Revelation by revelation. Energeia, the energy of God. God the Word. God the living Word. That nurtures the seed. So as you begin to come to God and allow God to communicate with you, please do not limit God in how God teaches you, nor how loud or softly God speaks with you, nor what God speaks with you about. We are so programmed to want what we want when we want it a certain way that we unconsciously place limits on God. We want God so often to affirm what we think we believe. We want God to serve us. Rather than us wanting to know God, the heart of God, where God hurts. So I began to pray, God, correct me where I'm wrong. Please correct me. Correct me. Correct me. There is a willingness to be wrong that I suggest you must walk through that door to be willing to know God. No matter how many experiences you have had with what you thought was God, I'm not saying it was or wasn't. I'm just saying, are you willing to trust God? God of light, are you willing to learn to know the difference between God that demands you obey its rules versus God that says, come unto me. Little children, come to me. Sit with me. Even you arrogant, pompous people, possibly like Zacchaeus, I'll eat dinner with you. I'll come meet you at 2 a.m. Are you willing to set your alarm? Are you willing to get up? Are you willing to come sit in silence a few minutes, just a few minutes with me? Are you willing to have coffee with me? Fix a cup of coffee. Imagine I'm sitting there with you. Or allowing me to take the form that I want. So if God is invisible to you, intangible to you, let God be God without dictating your terms to God and how and when God comes. And don't dictate to God whether God is male or female. Don't dictate to God your terms, but come as a child. The heart of God will honor you above your imagination when you come without pretense, when you come without want. But there's a cost. There's a cost to be willing to come without pretense and to come without want. Because the exercise of the ego is so stiff-necked, rigid, adamant, self-determinate, self-proclaiming. The mind wants to be the deceiver. The mind that's programmed into us with words from others and all of our wounds wants to supplant the living word. It wants to be the answerer of all of your prayers to keep you waiting, 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 using your energy until you die. My friend, life abundant is a term that doesn't even begin to approach the joy of living in love, beginning to love each other, allowing love to speak and teach you directly, because God will teach you all things. God will begin to teach you who you are, and God will teach you there is no mystery of Christ. God will teach you there is nothing unknowable. It's all up to you. What you are willing to do, willing to say, willing to see, and willing to sign. Value your signature. Value your word. Be punctual. So one of my first little prayers was, God, correct me where I'm wrong. I suggest that's a starting point. I began to pray more little one-sentence prayers. I began to pray, God, I don't want anything in my life that's not of you. And I meant it. I began to say, I want everything you have for me, God. I began to say, God, here I am. Here I am. I'm all yours. I began to say, teach me, God. Teach me and teach me to teach. I suggest to you, as you begin to come to God and learn to pray, that God will even teach you how to pray, and it will no more be unilateral. The interactivity of God with God pierces the veil between you and God, for God to grow what God is, a race not separate. And the race of God is emerging. And born again, God will be, in who conceive the seed of the everlasting King, experiencing the covenant of promise to be the family of God, all one. When you begin to pray, I suggest the origination of creativity in you will create new prayers to pray in the common vernacular of you, where you open your heart, where you begin to trust, where you begin to let God know your feelings, and you begin to share your feelings, not just in rote prayers, but your life. When I first began to go to pray an hour a day at a little chapel close to my home, from 6:30 to 7:30 every morning, when I first started going, an hour seemed like a long time to pray. But for some reason, I sort of committed. I wanted to know. And so as I went, and at first I sat on a pew, but thoughts would come. Some would just come of what I needed to do that day and all sorts of things. But I had to learn to keep pulling my attention, my focus, back to what I was doing and why I was there. To place my mind on knowing God. And before long, I was often kneeling. And out of my desperation and not knowing how else to pray, I began to share what I was experiencing in my life and that I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the answers, and no one I knew had the answers. So I came. I knelt. And very often I wept. And I did that. I don't know exactly how long. A couple of years maybe. And I remember one day I was kneeling behind the last pew in that little chapel, like I did every day. And trying to describe it the best I can, it was as if a very tender touch came to my arm and gently began to compel me to stand up. So I did. So I was standing there behind the last pew. So I continued to pray. The next day, I came in, knelt down. At some point, it's like I felt something encouraging me to stand up. So I stood up. I still prayed. I stayed the hour. An hour was my target, and an hour was what I tried to clock in and clock out. I wanted to, this idea of spending an hour with God. Could you not spend 1 hour with me? So I had an hour, this idea of spending an hour with God. So this began to happen day after day, where I felt like I was compelled to stand up. Well, I got tired of standing in one place pretty quickly. So I kind of began to walk around. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to know God. So in these little steps and these little things, so I began to walk around. And long story short, I simply began to walk and pray. Walk and pray. Walk and pray back and forth behind the back of that little chapel. Then I'd walk along the sides sometime. I'd walk and pray, and I'd walk and pray. And I'd walk and pray. I suggest to you, in opening your heart, there's a time to kneel. And there's a time to arise. There's a time to stand. This is a maturing process. Prayer is a growth prayer. Prayer is a growing, maturing process for you to come into the knowledge of God, for the operation of the mind of God to be in you, not separate. As you are creating the mind of God is creating you to be God, not separate. A race of gods, knowing the voice of God. We so often term it that only once or twice in my life have I ever heard what I thought was audible outside of me. I suggest to you, God comes tenderly. And God will speak. So God began to speak to me because I was speaking to God. And I was coming to God and I was asking, I was begging. And I felt like God began to communicate with me. And one day I felt so certain that God communicated with me so clearly and said, "You don't value my words." I was completely shocked because it seemed so clear to me. I felt so desperate to know God, to hear God's voice. And all of a sudden, "You don't value my words." So I thought, well, I didn't know what to do with it. So I pondered it for a week or so, wondering, what in the world? How can this be? Is this right? What's going on? And I thought, well, maybe that is right. Maybe possibly. So how do I respond? So I thought, if I don't value what God says I don't value what God's saying to me. How do I show value? How do I show value? And that's when I began to carry around a yellow tablet with me all the time. How simple is that? I decided I'd keep a yellow tablet and a pen with me all the time. I bought them, put them in both cars, carried them with me. When I got up at 2 a.m., I had them. I had them several rooms in the house. And somehow I began to realize in the past, when I felt like God revealed something to me or shared something, if I wrote it down at all, I'd grab a little scrap of paper. And there was a place that I had several scraps of paper where I felt like God had spoken to me. But now this was me coming into a new day. And I began to realize that wouldn't cut it. If I was going to show value, I was going to value them. How I wrote them, how I showed value to them, how I reread them. But I began to write everything on 8.5 by 11 at that time. I began to put a date on every page. I began to number the pages. And the more value that I showed to what I felt God was giving me, the more I received. I suggest to you that may be true for you too. I will speak more about these things because I teach. I'm a teacher. So many times I prayed, God, teach me and teach me to teach. How did that idea even come to me to pray that? I suggest to you, God gave me the idea into my mind, and that's what I prayed. And I teach. And so I have written now the first person words of God for 21 years. And it's a growth process. I'll speak more on this, but I'll quickly say, as I began to show value to what I felt like God was saying, conversing with me, most of the time God spoke to me and answered me with questions. In database 1, there are thousands of questions because this is a school of leadership. God leads leaders. God does not create waiters. God does not create people of faith to have faith. God creates action. God creates the heart that will listen and interact with God to do the things of God, becoming the people of God, not separate from the mind of God. This is a process that leads us into learning how to do the things Jesus did and greater. John 14:12. Jesus said, if you believe in me, you will do the things I do and more. You see, the heart of God is to teach. To lead, you, my friend, to lead. The heart of God is to teach you to teach and to lead you to be a leader. For you to have poise, confidence, and even table manners. Without fear. God is leading people of love, light, and joy to have peace, healing themselves, healing you, healing each other. It's not all from above. It's not all from outside. It's within us, coming to all of us within. Learning who we are, the identity of non-separation. The identity no longer being defined by the molecular. You see, we're coming to a new place where we are not afraid of space. Are you willing to no longer fear God? Are you willing to be without time? Are you willing to go to the future? Are you willing to go to the past? Are you willing to learn that time doesn't work like we think, like we've been taught, like we have felt? Are you willing to learn the objective is not to save your soul, but the opposite, but to disengage from it and learn the learning system of light, love, and peace, joy, becoming who you really are, knowing the heart of God that says, come sit with me. Come sit with me. Let us have coffee. Let us interact about what's going on in the world. Come sit with me. And let us begin to sit in each other's seat. Instead of what we've been taught, God is saying to you, come, let me make your enemies your footstool. The enemy is ignorance. The enemy is not somebody of another color or another religion. There is no satanic power that's outside of us. There's no power of God that's outside of us. We are creators. And if we think, believe, and attribute power to something that we then label with a noun and say that has power, we give it power. We're using our power. It's using our power, draining us from being who we really are. All the wounds that we have carried around and asked God to heal. I'm not sure God's going to heal them like we've thought or been taught. We simply lay them down. We lay down our wounds. We lay down our ignorance. We begin to walk in the realms of the Most High with the invitation of God itself to be what God is. And this is how we are beginning to learn to pray, learning to be taught, learning who we are, coming into a new identity, no longer being afraid of God or God's vengeance or wrath, no longer waiting, no longer trying to please God with faith, but coming in as a child into the presence of the Most High that may be on your couch, may be on your car, beside the lake, in your boat, your airplane, or on your desert. The manifestation of love is here. And the generation of paupers will no more be people who begin to open their heart to the living love of love rather than law. I ask you to no longer fornicate with your mind, the mechanical, programmed things that use your energy. There's a cost to knowing God, and that cost is costly. Just as the story of the Bible, the woman came and poured the most costly perfume over Jesus' feet. I suggest to you the most costly perfume that you can pour over what you think love is time. It takes time. It takes effort. Most of all, it takes surrender. So this idea of beginning to know God, you don't come to God, I'm asking you to consider, you don't come to God with a formula. This is heart stuff. Heart. Spirit. Healing your spirit. Become open to you healing you. Not waiting on another. Begin to heal your friends. Begin to forgive them. Begin to love them. Whether you say it out loud or not, you pass people on the street. I love you. 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 I forgive you. I forgive me. And as thoughts assail, and the accuser of the brethren, the satanic mind, the mind of separation, whatever you want to call it, that robs you from your identity, robs you from knowing who you are, walking into the kingdom of God while you yet still live. You begin to take authority. You begin to not hide from your own flesh. You begin to not hide from the revelation of God that reveals you've never been separate. Now walk in your power, walk in your leadership, walk in what you know, walk in humility, walk in love. Come to God in love. Come to the table of one. The table of one, where you sit down with God. And you begin to learn. You have no enemies. You begin to learn that you are a king in waiting. You begin to learn the king places the crown of the king on you. You, women of every color, nation, tribe, and tongue. Women, kings. And kings will no more denote a gender. The race of kings arise now, equal in authority, with love, healing, and power. This is our privilege. It's all before us. There's a Bible verse that says, every scribe taught of God brings forth from the old and the new I value the Bible, but the Bible no more limits me. Nor does church. Nor do people who don't understand that this is the new beginning. The garden of creation is between our ears, as is the most holy place. And all of us begin now to learn a new communication system, interactivity with what we have called the Most High, God, light, God of love. And the mind of God does not need syllables to communicate with the mind of God. Hear me well. Sound waves are not needed, and we are not language dependent. So this is my lesson to you this day, my teaching, my request, my invitation for you to no longer be satisfied with your knowledge of God. No matter what you have called it, no matter where you live, no matter what your socioeconomic status is, or what your culture condemns or creates, I love you, and I ask you to love you first. To begin to love love and see the power that every person is underneath their flesh is love, whether they know it or not. But this is the day that love rises in the leadership of one with the one mind who will no longer shun God or say God is something else. For the elements of the intangible, pure love and light, the pristine purity of that which I am is beginning to learn, operate, and create. I'm asking you to recreate you, to know God in the power, the fullness, of the resurrection of God. You in your shoes being it. Okay, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for opening your heart to God and being not afraid of God, being not fearful of God. Learning to love light, joy, and peace. My name is Theodore Cottingham with the School of God in Eureka Springs. You can write me, Box 34 in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, USA. On the web, theschoolofgod.us. I love you and ask you to live the life arising in leadership, no longer waiting for another. When God comes, it's you. You who will be the force of God. And your name will be love in two shoes right across your forehead. Thank you again for listening, being a part of the School of God, learning to let God teach you directly. I'll have seminars soon, I think, as this word goes forth, this message. Be the light of the world. Wait not on another. Arise in your love for each other, loving you first. Good day. Thank you.